Hey, what would rational science be? This would be a reference to Nikola Tesla's quote saying that you can think deeply but not clearly. And he made a reference to, his quote goes on, that there are scientists today that think very deeply but they're quite insane. You have to be able to think clearly. Rational science is, of course, referring to the first word there, rational. And this means it actually has to follow common sense and logic, and to a certain degree, greater or lesser, Occam's razor. We can't get into convoluted nonsense like parallel universe particles and quantum woo-woo. That's actually a great statement. I call it the cult of quantum. My favorite one is I call it the cult of bumping particles. And I've said this before, and nobody really gets how incredibly important this statement is, that there has never been two foundations upon the nature of reality that have ever been postulated throughout all of human history, recorded or otherwise, nor could be postulated, other than two things, the ether and the other one, atomism. Okay? The ether or atomism. Atomistic nonsense postulates that space has properties, curved space-time, and we all grow up with the Star Trek, Star Wars garbage and sci-fi garbage talking about bending unicorn farts, bending space-time, and as Nikola Tesla, who called Einstein a fuzzy-haired crackpot for making the supposition that space can be curved or bent, he calls him a fuzzy-haired crackpot for this position. He said specifically that space had no properties, and of course it doesn't. Space is no different than talking about a shadow. A shadow has attributes. If you stand in a shadow, of course you will feel cold, and you would therefore think with a superficial and shallow mind that therefore a shadow is something, but it's not. This fallacy of attribute reification, i.e. a shadow is not a thing itself. There's no such thing as a shadow. A shadow is an absence of light. It's like talking about waves. Today's scientists are not scientists. What they are mathematicians that have co-opted science. And I have nothing against math, and I have nothing against mathematicians. There's nothing at all wrong there. The problem is that these heretical, hysterical, both actually heretical and hysterical notions that Mother Nature is, this crazy, cross-eyed lunatic, with a bag of bumping particles in one hand and a calculator in the other, is completely irrational. This is not rational science. And we're not talking about dumbing things down. We're talking about making things clear. The term quantum, of course, does not refer to anything. A lot of people love to sound smart by... All you have to do is just take a scientific paper, and every 6th word replace or stick in the word quantum. Wah, 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 quantum interaction, wah, wah, quantum field, wah, 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 quantum. By the way, no branch of science has ever defined a field. I'm not talking about the 4 Maxwellian field equations, which define a field over a vector with a period of time with a given result, joules, watts, amps, so on and so forth. That doesn't tell you what a field actually is. Of course, a field is an ether perturbation modality. Rational physics, rational science, physics, science, it was co-opted by mathematicians sometime about, we can argue whether it's the 15th or 16th century. But we came into this new psychological and philosophical existentialist belief system, which spawned out of Western Europe by these pseudo-philosophers, where I call them navel-gazers. They look at the belly button lint in their navel. They're not real philosophers, with the definition of philosophia is the love of wisdom. And of course the root of wisdom, or the sister of wisdom, is to be rational, to be logical. But, these fanciful suppositions about reality being mutual particle interactions doesn't stand common sense, and it doesn't stand the smell test of anybody that has a brain or common sense. But people with brains and common sense, they don't really exist anymore. This is what Nikola Tesla talked about so often. He even wrote a poem. It's a poem called Of Olympian Gossip. And he trashes all the science, because they were just as bad in his era, the early 1900s. They're actually way worse now. You know, they literally believe that you could atomize or particleize everything. And the reason for that is that the fundamental cult of any mathematician is that if you can't count it or quantify it, then it doesn't exist. I mean, how the hell are you going to do math on anything that you actually can't count or quantify? And of course, the answer is that you cannot. Mathematicians' root cult is that it must be counted. And here we end up with Dielectric, as Einstein called it. We have the cult of quantum. This is an atomistic belief system that everything in the universe is mutual particle interaction, but that's not true at all. You can never explain light speeding up after it leaves glass or another medium because it would break the law of conservation of energy. Light, for example, of course, is not a particle and it's not a wave. It doesn't move from point A to point B. It's not an emission. Light doesn't have a speed. It's a rate of induction. A wave is not even a thing at all. A wave is what something does. A wave is a station or an adjective said of something else. It's like my hand waving. You know, modern scientist, who's not a scientist at all, as a mathematician, would call this a wave. But this is my hand in motion with measured over a period of time with a given vector with a net result of calories or joules expelled to cause that action to occur. As I said, and this is so important, getting back to that point that I kind of diverged off of, is that there's never been two postulates of the ultimate nature of reality that have ever been other than the ether or bumping particles. Yeah. There's only these two. There's never been anything other than bumping particles, i.e. atomism, yeah, which is perfectly the realm of mathematicians, who have hijacked and co-opted science, which fundamentally at its root, true scientists were Aristotelian, Platonic, Pythagorean. It was rational. Yeah. Now it's completely irrational. It doesn't pass the smell test. It doesn't even pass Occam's razor. You can never explain anything. And of course, the fundamental, and this is not my position, this is their position. Quantum says that their entire religion, which is what it is, it's a religion, but their entire belief system is based upon their understanding of the nature of light. But it's a rate of induction. Light is not a particle, it's an arbitrary conceptual abstraction as to the nature of the longitudinal pulse perturbation, rarefactions, and compressions, kind of like beads on a necklace or pearls on a necklace. You actually have rarefactions and compressions. You would if you were an atomistic fool, which these people are. They would count these dielectric longitudinal compressions. Well, that's a photon right there. You know, if you didn't have a sharp mind, and you couldn't think clearly, that would make all the sense in the world. You know, if I could just cut out half my brain, and just think like a mathematician, I would come up and agree with the same BS as these people do. Well, these are light particles. You see, we can see them right there. And there's these bumps. Well, that's a photon. It's like, no. Those are dielectric field rarefactions and compressions. A child with a child's mentality would also count pearls on a necklace, right? Well, there's one pearl, two pearl, three. These are like pearl particles. I know why mathematicians and the cult of quantum came up with this arbitrary, non-existent, irrational lie to Mother Nature that there are photon particles, but they have no basis in reality whatsoever. It is purely conceptual. It is a misunderstanding of the coaxial circuit of light. If you know what a coax cable looks like, or cross-section, we actually have rebounding manifestations of of electrical and magnetic, whether it be linear or circular polarization, and corresponding XY propagation along a longitudinal of rarefactions and compressions of the dielectric. Specifically, it forms a circuit which also, too, is the perfect expression of the right-hand rule. Now, neither you nor myself, unfortunately, were brought up with the most understanding nature of fields, and you should Google search it. You'll find a million examples and a million images of the right-hand rule. This is the circuit. If you know the circuit, you know the current. There's 3 different variations, really 4, on the right-hand rule. There's also 2 a left-hand rule. Just do Google search the right-hand rule. But you can never lay a foundation of what Mother Nature is with this irrational nonsense of atomism. You can't do it. We have things in humanity, even though we have all this great technology like iMacs and iPads and all this other crap, It doesn't mean we actually understand what's going on. Invention of technology and discovery doesn't mean we actually have a rational, logical grasp as to how they work. What is the fundamental nature of what they are? You take, for example, I've written a book on magnetism, and I can happily say I'm the first person in the world that actually fully understands what the hell magnetism is, fundamentally in itself, of itself, by itself. And ever since the ancient days, countless thousands of years ago, that lodestones were discovered, and this is a cheap ferrite ring magnet from a speaker, by the way, they break off pieces of the lodestone, and they noticed that they would jump towards one another. And of course, we knew that these were magnets later on. Of course, we still have this conception of magnetic attraction. We all grew up with the same nonsense. I did, you did, everybody did. Magnetic attraction. Well, you get two magnets close together, we get inverse polarities. They will jump towards one another. This is magnetic attraction. Well, that's completely false. Misapplication, or completely non-use, actually, of a rational thinking mind. Magnetic attraction doesn't exist at all because magnetism is denotatively a centrifugal force vector. It is literally the geometry of the torus. Yeah. Centrifugal divergence, literally the creation of space, is a release of energy. This, where no energy is actually involved, that's not magnetic attraction. Magnets accelerating towards one another has nothing to do with magnetism. A magnet, by definition, denotation, is not a quantitative object which is different than a pre-magnet. Before this speaker magnet became a magnet, it was 100% identical quantitatively. When it became a magnet, what it actually attained to, the quality of it changed. It changed from an incoherent, multi-trillion axis ferrite atomic mass to a single point source where the entire magnetic fields of all the atoms or the compounds, in the case of neodymium iron boron, are acting in unison, and it becomes a point source entity. None of it. We all grew up with this notion that laser light was coherent light, which attributionally, of course, it is coherent light. But what a laser is a point source light emission. This is the reason, by the way, why LEDs are so dangerous for your eyes, because they're halfway between regular bulbs, normal old tungsten bulbs, and lasers. We know how dangerous lasers are to your eyes. LEDs are right in the middle. Anyways, a point source. But magnetic attraction does not exist. That's like talking about dehydrated water. Just think about that for a second. How stupid is dehydrated water? Well, you just add water. Someone sold trick cans ages ago. You can still buy them on eBay. It says dehydrated water. You open it up and there's nothing in there. It's like, just add water. There's no such thing as magnetic attraction. Every scientist on this earth, literally, this is no exaggeration, every scientist on the earth believes in magnetic attraction. There's magnetic attraction. It has nothing to do with magnetism. The actual denotative field modality, i.e. magnetism. Magnetism, by the way, is the dielectric field. Magnetic attraction doesn't even exist. Does not exist. It doesn't exist. But sure, it's two magnets that are attracting one another. This is what happens when people can think deeply, like Nikola Tesla referred to, but they can't think clearly. You can think very, very deeply. Insane asylums, by the way, are full of some really, really, really intelligent people. Way more intelligent than you are. I'm not trying to put you down, but that's a fact. I remember like chess champions and stuff in just crazy, insane asylums. These people are not dumb, but they can't think clearly. They have a lot of facts in their brain, and they can do like crazy math. They're like people in insane asylums. Some of them, not all of them, of course, obviously not. They can do complex math, like a savant. But these people, they don't know one side up from down the other. They don't have any common sense. They don't know how to order these facts in their head for logical, rational thought. Rational science requires wisdom, it requires common sense, and it requires a clarity of vision for information processing that basically doesn't exist anymore. People just don't know how to think anymore. They can't think clearly. Tesla was railing on this in the 1920s. How the hell worse do you think it is here 100 years later in the 2020s? Rational science will, as long as humanity doesn't destroy itself, which it probably will make a comeback. People will see things clearly. It won't require, because there are a lot of people out there that are PhD professors of physics and and of chemistry and which is fine, great. They can't think clearly. They can't see the big picture of what things are, how they work. Everything is pressure mediation. There are not multiple different fields. Sure there are. There's gravity and there's electricity. None of these things are true. It's like ice, water, and steam. You know, a little child knows ice, water, and steam is just water. What's ice, water, and steam differentiation is merely temperature and pressure modalities expression of water. The same is true of field modalities. Magnetism is a dielectric field. Literally, the loss of the inertia or energy that defines the dielectric actually manifests as a centrifugal divergent toroidal field. That then becomes the word we call magnetism. Electricity is just phi times psi equals Q in Planck of electrification. In other words, a hybrid of dielectricity and magnetism operating in conjunction. Gravity is just mutual mass acceleration. By the way, you know, not to get on a point since I've talked about this endlessly before, but the same thing we call magnetic attraction and the same thing idiots call gravity are one and the same thing. Also, too, electrostatic cling. You ever opened up a box of styrofoam pellets and those little damn stinking pellets stuck to your hand? That is electrostatic cling, you know? That's also gravity. But gravity doesn't exist at all. That's not to say the phenomenon of gravity doesn't exist. Mutual mass acceleration does exist. You know, I'm going to drop this rock and it's going to accelerate towards the Earth. Actually, both are accelerating towards each other, but since the Earth's mass is infinitely larger, it's not moving. That is just non-point source mutual mass acceleration. The only difference between this and this, or the Earth and this rock, the only difference between this and this, since this is infinitely more powerful, the distinction is only one thing. This is point source acceleration, and this is non-point source incoherent mutual mass acceleration. Basically the same differentiation between a light bulb and a laser. So the perfect light bulb analogy, we're talking about totally incoherent light, yeah, the so-called gravity. And a laser, you know, just like you stick in a couple little watch batteries and a laser pointer, you can get some dangerous light out of that. I have some dangerous lasers. It's a point source emission. Anyway, I hope you liked this video. I hope I didn't drone on too long. I like to go a lot deeper down the rabbit hole, but every time I do, everybody says, well, I didn't understand when you first started talking what you're talking about. Now you got so deep, I don't really know what you're talking about. I try to keep it simple. Even though I keep it really simple, for some reason people stay there, they're confused. I think I'm illuminating it quite well, using analogies and whatnot, but I don't know why people still get confused. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Peace out. Bye-bye.